Vice Chair Meyer. Commissioner Bagwell.
Here.
Oh, sorry. Here. Commissioner Whitefield.
Here.
Commissioner Caldwell.
Here.
Commissioner Wilkie McCulloch. Commissioner Cartwright. A quorum is present. Then from Open Space Advisory Committee, Chairperson Scott, Vice Chair Welch, Member Evans, Member Hall,
Here.
Member Inverson,
Here.
Member Masad,
Here.
Member Michael.
Here.
A quorum is present.
The record will reflect that Chair Scott has an excused absence. We're going to move on to public comment. And this is for members of the public who wish to address the Joint Open Space Advisory Committee and/or the Parks and Rec Commission may come forward and speak on matters related to the committee/commission. Your comments are limited to 3 minutes per person on topic. If you require extended discussion, please let us know and we'll schedule it for a future agenda item. Is there any members of the public who'd like to make a public comment at this time?
I see no public comment, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Hearing no public comment, we're going to move on to item number 4 for possible action, approval of the minutes from the Open Space Advisory Committee meeting of August 17th, 2020, and the Parks and Recreation Commission meetings of October 6th, 2020, and October 19th, 2020. Vice Chair Welch, would you like to do the honors for the open space?
Yes, thank you. Do any of the members have any comments on the draft minutes?
I have one addition to add. Item number 11 on PDF page 5, 70212. I asked about inquiring about the continuing discussion of naming open spaces. It just says discussion of open spaces, which and the remainder of the paragraph never actually mentions the naming of open spaces.
Thank you, Jeremy. Do any of the other members have any comments?
This is Donna Inverson. On item number 12, public comments, 4th line down under Mr. Graytek's comments. It says protect the wetlands repairing area. It's riparian area.
Thank you, Donna. Does anyone else have any comments? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the minutes? Anyone?
Sure, I will. I move to approve the minutes of August 17th, 2020 for the Open Space Advisory Committee meeting.
And a second?
Second.
I'm sorry, who was the second? Who made the second?
This is Joanne, Michael. I'll second that.
Thank you, Joanne. Any other comments? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you so much. All right, on to Parks and Rec. Have all the members read the minutes from October 6th and October 9th? Are there any comments or corrections to be made? All right, hearing none, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of October 6th and October 19th, 2020.
I move to approve the minutes of October 6, 2020 and October 19th, 2020 as presented.
Thank you. Is there a
And
second?
I'll second.
All right, thank you. Who was the second? Janice?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Any comments? Hearing none, I'll entertain a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Sounds like the motion carried and the minutes are approved. On to item 5 for discussion only, presentation and discussion regarding dog use in parks and open space. Our park rangers, John Costello and Tyler Kerber, are going to do the presentation. Gentlemen?
Thank you. For the record, John Costello, Park Ranger.
Tyler Kerver, Park Ranger.
All right, so we have prepared a presentation for dog use in parks and open space areas in Carson City. So some of the things that we went over for this presentation to provide to you all, we just wanted to go over the facts and the data that we have collected over the years as it pertains to dogs in parks and open space areas. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide an overview of relevant city ordinances related to dogs in parks and open space, which fall directly under the purview of Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Department, and other ordinances relevant to duties and responsibilities of dog owners in general. Information will include Carson City Municipal Code sections, rules and regulations in neighboring jurisdictions, and data of dog-related incidents within Carson City parks and open space. Adjacent agency laws. So we did some research for this presentation with some of our neighboring agencies, such as Washoe, Sparks, Reno, other agencies that we work with as well, such as Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service, and every agency has a different take on dog use in their specific areas. Some are a little more consistent than others. And really, that's the whole point of this presentation, to kind of get a general idea of what other agencies, what their rules and regulations are compared to ours, and kind of figure out if we'd like to go towards a more consistent approach. So the U.S. Forest Service advises that dogs must be under control at times and recommends that people have their dogs on leash at all times. It is required that dogs are on leash at all times in developed areas. So your developed areas are going to be your picnic areas, campgrounds, restrooms, play areas, forest buildings, interpretive areas, fish cleaning stations, boat docks, boat ramps, piers, marinas, and trailheads. The U.S. Forest Service in the Carson Ranger District has an order that requires dogs to be under physical restraint of a leash that is no longer than that of 6 feet in length on specific trails for distance of 1 mile along each trail from the designated trailhead. Now, the Kings Canyon Trailhead, there are a lot of U.S. Forest Service properties that are adjacent to our Carson City Parks and Recreation open space properties, and our rules and regulations are very different. As the enforcement for the department, we run into this issue a lot, not just with dogs, but with other rules and regulations for BLM and U.S. Forest Service. So one of these trailheads in the Carson Ranger District that is a part of our jurisdiction as well is the Kings Canyon Trailhead. That is one that this is not enforced, the 1 mile to the trailhead. So as far as BLM does not have any leash requirements. They encourage all users to check with local office for a leash policy. As I'm sure you all know, we have a BLM office in Carson City. They encourage all users to keep dogs under control and yield to other users. So you'll hear under control a lot, and there's really not one specific definition for under control. We've done some research on that, and it can be by voice control, whether or not your dog is going to be by your side when you're out on a trail and you don't have it on a physical restraint. So under control is kind of open for interpretation. So we've seen that it makes things a little more clear when it's either on leash or off leash as opposed to under control. So BLM doesn't have a whole lot as it pertains to dogs in their areas. So we're going to go ahead and get into some of our neighboring agencies. Douglas County, just south of us, the county has a different regulation for different locations as we do. So for instance, Long Ranch Park The west side of that park is on leash. The east side, you can have your dog off leash. And then Mills Park, for instance, we don't allow dogs at all at that park. So similar to Douglas, we have different rules and regulations for different locations. And we'll kind of get into that a little later, but there's a lot that goes into why you don't allow dogs on or off leash at a specific area, or why we don't allow dogs at all. In campgrounds, dogs must be leashed at all times. The county recently opened a fenced dog park this year in July. It's called Johnson Lane Park. And then there has been some discussion about adding more areas for dogs, because Douglas does not have a whole lot for dogs either, other than that dog park that they just recently opened in July. And then Washoe County. Washoe County is obviously a much bigger agency than what we are in Carson City. Their rules and regulations differ as well. Pets must be kept on leash at all times in most Washoe County parks. There are 2 areas within Washoe County parks that allow dogs off, or that allow off-leash use. The multi-use pasture located within Rancho San Rafael Regional Park and the Link Piazzo Dog Park. Pets are not permitted at Bowers Mansion Regional Park in order to protect the historic significance and character of the grounds surrounding the mansion. So the reason that we're kind of getting into the specifics of each agency is because we share these similarities. We have historic sites, such as Silver Saddle Ranch. So those are all things that are going to be open to discussion, places like Carson River Canyon as well. We don't have any particular rules and regulations about dogs in our open space areas. So the Wilbur D. May Arboretum prohibits pets in order to protect the ecosystem within the Arboretum. Dogs are permitted part of the year on a leash at Silver Lake and Swan Lake Nature Study Area, as they have sensitive bird areas and to protect from conflicts with dogs and birds. Dogs may be prohibited during nesting season. This is another one that we share similarities. I know I'm probably stealing some of Tyler's material because he's going to get into some of that as well, but we just put that nice new trail in going along Buzzy's Ranch as well. As you all know, that's a heavily trafficked wildlife area for migratory birds and other wildlife. So pets must be kept on leash at all time in most Washoe County parks. I already alluded to that. And our next agency that we will get into is going to be Sparks. Sparks has specific regulations for different areas within their jurisdiction. Sparks has areas designated for off-leash, otherwise dogs are on leash, and it is expected that owners will be picking up dog feces. This seems to be a common theme among agencies that they really want to hammer home about picking up after your dog. We've made, I feel like, a pretty good effort with our volunteer program as well. Mackenzie, our volunteer coordinator, has worked with Washoe County, and we've tried to push a little bit of a mutt mitt program with some volunteers to make sure we're constantly filling up those mutt mitt stations. So there's really no excuse for an individual to go to a park and not pick up after their dog, to make sure that we have those mutt mitt stations filled. So. And then our next agency will be Reno. Reno has 3 dog parks where the dogs can be off leash if they follow a specific set of rules. Whitaker Park, Virginia Lake Dog Park, and the Biggest Little Dog Park. You can see all these rules. You can see all the rules these parks have in place to keep it safe for everyone. In all other parks, dogs are supposed to be leashed, and owners are responsible for picking up and properly disposing of dog waste while in Reno's public spaces. The dog's owner is responsible for having a suitable means to pick up dog waste. Dogs are prohibited except service animals at Oxbow Nature Study Area per Reno Municipal Code. And then one thing that was discussed as well is in Reno, all dogs must have a current license. That's something that is not implemented in Carson that could be open for discussion. And we'll get into later in the presentation, but we reached out to Nevada Humane Society, who we work closely with, and there isn't a whole lot of data, unfortunately, that they collect on their dog contacts or any specific incidents that happen with dogs at parks, in neighborhoods, at residents. So it was a little tough to get some information based on that, but we just had to go off our data that we've collected over the years. And then Incline Village, as of August 1st, 2020, Incline Village has issued a mandatory no dog policy on all of their beach properties with the exception of Ski Beach, and that's October to April. All other outdoor recreation locations are designated for specific sports. Village Green and Aspen Grove open space allowed on or off leash. And then this will bring us to a map of our Carson City pet-friendly parks. That picture was taken at Ronald D. Wilson, a popular park in North Carson where dogs are allowed on leash. So you can see the first portion of this presentation, there's a common theme that there really isn't a whole lot of consistency throughout agencies about what their rules and regulations are on dog use, whether it be on leash, off leash. I think you can look a little deeper into each agency and see why dogs are allowed on leash or off leash at specific areas, whether it be wildlife, cultural sensitivity, things of that nature. So I'll kick it over to Tyler and he can get into our pet-friendly parks.
All right, so if you want to go to the next slide, John. Okay, so this is the map of all of our Carson City dog parks, or all of our parks that we allow pets. And we use pets because we've also made contact with some people with cats as well. So Schultz Ranch Park in South Carson is not on this map. I don't think I was able to fit it in there, possibly. So we use this map when we are educating users about where they can take their dogs. It does not show open space areas, but we'll talk about that here in a minute. So most of our open space areas, we allow dogs. All right, so next slide. So just an overview of our pet-friendly parks. Carson City has 15 city parks that allow dogs. 6 of those parks require the dogs to be on leash at all times. There are a couple exceptions, like John mentioned, Long Ranch Park. Half of it is leashed and half of it is unleashed, which kind of creates some confusion. Dogs are prohibited in all other parks based on our municipal codes. More specifically, there are 2 parks dedicated to dogs, one at Fuji Park and at Sonoma Park. There's also a planned dog park in the new Lampa Ranch development right next to the park's office. The parks that don't allow dogs are signed as such, however, they often lack municipal codes to back them up on the signs themselves. There is no one specific reason as to why a park allows dogs or not. It can create challenges for users to determine where they can bring their pets and challenges for us to explain why. When I'm out with someone at Mills Park where we don't allow dogs, I often use the excuse that it's really big and it would take a lot of money for us to man the mutt stations and for maintenance staff to clean up all the dogs' waste. And they also can create conflicts with geese as well. But when we did some research, we couldn't find any specific reason as to why some parks allow them and some don't.
Yeah, so just to tie into that with Mills Park, there's a lot of different entrances to Mills Park. And one of the things really to educate the public is you gotta have adequate signage so they know when they enter a specific park that they cannot have their dog there or they have to have their dog on a leash. And then just to kind of touch on some of the research that we did for this presentation, Tyler mentioned that there was no rhyme or reason why they decided specific parks don't allow dogs. We have dogs on leash, off leash. I went back to late 90s meeting minutes for Parks and Recreation Commission. I also reached out to Roger Mollendorf, who was a previous Parks and Recreation director, and Scott Fahrenbrook. And in our municipal codes, you'll see that the director can designate a certain I guess, regulation or bylaw for a specific park. And it seems to us, based on our research and lack of, I guess, information on why they came to that conclusion, it occurred to us that that's probably what happened, was they had a discussion and it had to be approved and everybody agreed, and that's what they decided for those specific parks.
Yeah, so next slide. All right, so that is Benji, that's Ranger Costello's dog, and he is at Long Ranch Park. So here's all of our Carson City municipal codes that relate to dogs or other animals in the city. The one we quote the most is the top one in Title 13, which is the Carson City Parks Recreation Open Space title. And that one just says no dogs can be in there without, if it's not designated for that use. Most of them are in Title 13, but there is that one, Title 7, that the Carson City Sheriff's Office or the Animal Control can use as well. But Animal Control cannot cite, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. We don't have a code that specifies whether dogs have to be on leash or not. So we kind of use that Title 13, Section 2.120, the animals one. And that one basically just says no person can let loose their animals, and that also talks about horses and stuff. So we'll use that one if we have to, if there is someone in an area with their dog off leash where it's supposed to be on leash, like at some Long Ranch Park or at Ronald D. Wilson Park. All right, next slide. So when we make contact out in the field relating to dogs, we track it in our system. Since March 2019, these are all of our contacts relating to dogs. Most of them, as you can see, occurred at Mills Park, which prohibits all pets. And it's pretty attractive to locals and to people coming to visit Carson City because it's such a huge park. And sometimes I think that it's a shame that we don't allow dogs there because it is pretty big. We don't have very many areas where you can throw a ball for your dog, any giant fields like that. So yeah, Mills Park alone had 161 contacts in that amount of time. And we have 290 total contacts that were created between March 25th, 2019 and November 10th, 2020. We have not collected any data on open space areas because there are no established rules or regulation in open space areas. However, there is a conflict among dog users, dogs, and wildlife that have been reported to the department, which that's not on here.
And just to kind of touch on that, just because we don't have formal data, as Tyler alluded to, that doesn't mean when we're out at Silver Saddle Ranch, we have people coming up to us, advising us of some of the wildlife issues, wildlife versus dog type issues, which is why we take that opportunity to educate the public and ultimately create signage for, say, high activity when coyotes are in the area, out at Silver Saddle Ranch or Ambrose Natural Area, things of that nature. So there is conflict that happens. Unfortunately, we just don't have the data as it pertains to open space at this time.
All right, so the Carson City contracts with the Nevada Humane Society to oversee animal issues on the city's behalf. They provide shelter operations, vaccines, licensing, and other animal health and services for Carson City residents. They do not officially have citation authority, so citations are issued by the Carson City Sheriff's Office or most commonly the District Attorney's Office if there is a conflict. The Nevada Humane Society has 3 animal control officers in Carson City, and they utilize many forms of education, including media outreach, informational brochures, social media, in-person outreach, and through incoming calls to the shelter. We've worked with all of them a few times when we need their help with animals. Yes, so next slide. All right, so dogs in open space. As you all know, Carson City is lucky to have over 6,000 acres of open space, 18 miles of paved trails, 14 miles of unpaved multi-use trails, and 35 miles of single track where dogs are free to run with or without a leash most often. So there are some signs that state dogs must be under the control of their owners, but there is no real definition as to what that means. So if we were to make contact with those individuals, it would just be on our discretion whether that dog was under the control or not. The new Buzzy's Ranch Trail has some signage that states dogs must be on the leash, And that was decided based on the many bird species that live there, as well as the active ranch. And I think we should address that a little bit further along the Carson River as well. There are a few open space areas and trails that may need further regulation based on habitats of flora and fauna, as well as historical sites like Silver Saddle Ranch. Due to the increased use of our trails, we may need to address leash laws to avoid user conflicts between equestrians and mountain bikes. So in partnership with the Carson Animal Services Initiative, the Recreation Division hosts the Pooch Plunge at the aquatic facility. This event is held in the outdoor pool the last day of summer season, with all proceeds benefiting the Carson Animal Services Initiative. The park rangers and AmeriCorps Vista volunteers hold interpretive programs such as the Trails and Tails, specifically for dog owners. However, dogs are welcome on a leash at most city interpretive programs in our parks and open space. And there's often one or two participants that bring their dogs on our full moon hikes, which really like it. We do require them to be on a 6-foot leash at all times when they're on our hikes with us, but for the most part, they're allowed on our interpretive programs. Rangers have outreach materials readily available for dog owners during contacts made in the field, like the dog park brochure you can see up there. We usually hand that out to people when we make contact with them, and it has that nice map that I showed you guys, as well as some other resources on there for dog owners and where they can go in Carson City, because it is a little confusing with signage and, not much information out there. And like John mentioned, we also have Mutt-Mitt volunteers that are also performing some community outreach for us and filling the Mutt-Mitt stations on our trailheads and in our parks.
I will add to that our parks maintenance staff does the majority of the Mutt-Mitts, open space staff, park rangers, and then the addition of this newly found Mutt-Mitt volunteer program. So it's a collaborative effort for sure to make sure that those Mutt-Mitt stations are all filled and ready to go. So like I said, nobody really has an excuse not to pick up after their dog. So, any questions?
No.
This is another picture of Benji, and you can see I have him on a leash at Long Ranch.
Gary Masad here. I've got a question for you. Hello?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
What is the purpose of this discussion on this dogs? Are you guys looking to come up with a policy for all parks and recs and open space, or are you just talking about the way things are now and you're not going to change a thing?
That would be the end goal. This is John Costello. That would be the end goal. The main reason for this presentation was to ultimately open it for discussion, because as you can see, we don't have a consistent message across the board within our department. However, most agencies don't as well. So on our end, there are some things that we could add to our existing parks and open space areas, signage, codes, things of that nature. So really, this presentation was just to open it up for discussion and give everybody an idea of what other agencies are doing as it pertains to dogs in their parks and open space areas.
This
Thank
is
you.
a starting point, if you will.
That's correct, yeah. This is the starting point, so we can have further discussions on this to maybe develop a more concrete policy that's consistent for our parks users and open space users, so it's not as confusing when they come into a park and, they thought that they could have their dog off a leash, and in reality, that was the park that they were at last week. And ultimately, for the park rangers, from an enforcement standpoint and educational standpoint, it would make things a little easier for us to educate the public on, where you can take your dogs, where you can't, where to stay out of certain areas, on and off leash, et cetera.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments from either of the commissioners or the committee members?
On the leash rule or regulation, it doesn't seem to be specific as to whether or not the owner has to be on the other end of the leash.
Yeah, I can't really comment on that. It is a good point because, people, I have seen, I was just at Sonoma with my dog a couple of days ago, and people have their dogs on leash, but there is specific rules and regulations at different agencies that say they have to be under the physical restraint of their owner. And that, gets a little more specific other than just having their dog on a leash.
This is Janice Caldwell. I was very active in the Parks for Paws movement some time ago. We were told we couldn't use Fuji anymore on the grass because unfortunately owners weren't picking up after their dogs. And so a group of us helped build the other field that's down at the other end without a whole lot of help from the city, as I recall. I guess I wonder what's going to happen with all that.
To answer your question, I did see your name in the meeting minutes, Janice, when I was doing my research. However, and a lot of this from the ranger standpoint is not going to be opinion based. Our presentation was strictly the facts and data that we've collected. However, I don't believe anything would happen to that specific area at Fuji because we have the grass area where you can have dogs on leash, and then we have the dog park area of Fuji that has the large dog and small dog area that's fenced in. So that specifically is not part of this discussion to where we're planning on doing anything with that area specifically.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Bagwell?
So maybe just to kick off the discussion for all of us, I think consistency is probably one of the most important things either of these boards can approach. So that we treat each of the areas, so maybe Parks has its rule, open space has its rules, keep a dog on a leash within a mile of your trailhead, and then let the dog run thereafter. I'm not suggesting that's the answer, but I am suggesting that we work to come up with consistency of rules so that if I'm at this park or that park or this one, the rule's the same. And so I wonder for you guys, I like personally the Fuji Park model where it's on a leash unless it's in the dog park fenced area where you can then unleash it. So I just throw that out as a beginning discussion that to try and pretend that someone's not going to take their animal to Mills Park when you've already had 160 that complain to you about the dog in Mills Park, because people don't understand that one. So to me, it might be easier for us to just say, if it's not in a dog fenced area, it has to be on a leash. And that goes for all parks. So I just throw it out as a discussion item for us to all start thinking about what would be the most consistent, fair, and safe. I've watched dogs, and whether you like it or not, and think that you can voice control your animal. I've seen children knocked over. It just doesn't work. And so I think a park, we're trying to make it for all users, or as many users as we can to recreate. So I just throw that out as a discussion point. I look at, what's the one, Longview. So that one's probably the strangest dog policy I've ever seen. Like the dog's gonna know he just passed over the magical demarcation line and he can't run past that line. So I really like the ideas of it's on a leash at all times unless it's in a fence. But again, I just throw it out as a discussion item.
Would that be the debarkation line? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and Chair, just to your point, Long Ranch specifically, we actually do have signage, but it is odd that half the park is on leash, half the park is off. On the west side where we require dogs on leash, there's a playground. So to specific areas where we have the parks, there's other factors that play into this, obviously, like playgrounds, where children are going to be present, to your point. Wildlife is another one. And then open space, we probably have to treat a little differently because, as we know, people like to go down by the river and let their dog off leash and jump in the river. However, that's something that could potentially disturb wildlife or the river corridor, the riparian area, things of that nature. So those are all factors to obviously take into consideration when we continue this discussion, because we do have a lot of cultural or historical sites within Carson City Parks and Recreation and Open Space Department as well that we'll have to take into consideration. So,
Gentlemen, what would you need from both of our bodies to help you get started? What are you looking for, advice, suggestions, or support?
I think support for sure. And then, the whole idea behind this presentation is just so we can have a discussion with all of you, both committees, Parks and Recreation Commission and Open Space Advisory, so we can ultimately all get on the same page and have a consistent message with this. And I think the support and a consistent message would honestly be the biggest help to us, because we have just recently been given the green light essentially to issue citations for infractions that happen within our parks and open space areas. And of course, we're going to educate first, always, first and foremost. However, it is nice to have that ability to be able to cite, and an open space doesn't have its own codes. However, we've had multiple discussions with the DA's office, and we've been given the okay for that as well, to be issuing citations. So, but like I said, education is always going to be first and foremost, and I would say support. Would you agree with that, Tyler?
Yeah. Before we cite, we want to educate, and it would be nice if everything was consolidated and good across the board before we cite, so that we know that they knew that they were doing something wrong.
I think one other thing that we're going to have to really improve as well, if we get to that consistent message across the board with parks specifically, is adequate signage. And I know we mentioned that in our presentation, but it really is important to cover any of the entrance points to the park or open space area. I know it's a lot more difficult with open space areas. They're not always fenced, but adequate signage is definitely going to be a big one, and that's all part of the education process. I think educational materials like Tyler developed the brochure, so funding for that ultimately, and finding that in the budget to make sure that we have adequate education material to provide to our users, and then the adequate signage for sure.
Any questions or comments from any of the commission or committee members?
This is Dave Whitefield.
Go ahead, Commissioner Whitefield.
Just wanted to say thank you for the presentation. I'm sorry I missed part of it. We had a little excitement here in our room. Our dryer just burned up. So sorry I had to skip part of it. I do have some questions about, comments and questions about Mills Park. I know you mentioned that there was problems with interaction, dog interaction with wildlife there. And I realize when people frequent these parks, even with their dogs on leash, the dog waste doesn't always get picked up. But my thought is, I would like to entertain an idea that dogs be allowed on leash in Mills Park, perhaps to help with the goose problem, because nobody's picking up the goose poop. And I guess I'm wondering if we allowed dogs there even on leash, perhaps it would cut down on some of the goose poop. In light of that, I realize stations must cost money, and to replenish them probably costs money too. But I'd be interested in knowing what the cost of those stations and the maintenance of the stations would be relative to the cost of signage. Signage obviously just a one-time deal, but still, there's that. And then I'm wondering too, if, how, do we generate a bunch of revenue with the citations? I know you try to educate first, but is it also seen as a source of revenue, like, like speeding tickets? So those are my questions and comments. Thank you.
So for your most recent, the citations, we've been advised by the DA's office, but that the revenue for the citations that we issue go into the general fund, not to the Parks Department specifically. Is that, yeah. And as far as the goose problem at Mills Park, we do realize that it is an issue, and there's kind of that fine line between nuisance and disturbing wildlife. So that's all something that could be open for discussion, but wildlife is one of the issues. Well, we used to have two playgrounds. One of the playgrounds at Mills Park, and then the special events that we have at Mills Park. We have the 3 pavilions, and then we have the Mark Teixeira Pavilion as well. So there are a lot of events that take place at Mills Park, which is part of the reason that we haven't allowed dogs in the past. So there's multiple factors that go into Mills. And then what was the other question that you had? Oh, the cost of the mutt mitt stations. We don't have that information. I know that we could get that from our parks maintenance staff, and we could get that to you after the meeting if you'd like, potentially tomorrow. I could email you directly because I know Dan Cassens would have that answer. The mutt mitt station as well as the mutt mitt bags, because I know that is a significant cost that comes out of the budget.
I'd like to make a comment about the mutt mitts. Why don't we enter into a partnership with the different pet stores in the area? Let them put advertising on the bags, and help pick up some of the costs. That way, we don't pick up the full cost of the mitts and they get advertising. You've been at Sonoma, you know how many people use the mitts there. It just seemed like a win-win for both parties.
Yeah, so we're actually actively in the process of pursuing that with our volunteer coordinator, Mackenzie. She's been working on that with one of the grooming businesses in town. We're trying to decide what would be better, if putting a standalone sign under the mutt mitt actually on the pole that says that this specific mutt mitt station is sponsored by this business, and or placing a sticker on the mutt mitt. We obviously want it to look as clean as possible, so we're actively pursuing that.
We were in Washoe County a couple years ago, and all the mutt mitts had the information printed on the bags, and it was from a variety of different pet-related stores, so it seemed like that was how they were offsetting the cost of their mutt mitts. And if we can do something similar and save ourselves $1, let's do it.
Yeah, Mackenzie's last day actually is coming up here on Friday, but the volunteer program is most certainly going to continue, as well as the mutt mitt program. Tyler and I will take over that, but I was actually just discussing that exactly with Dave Navarro just, I think, 2 weeks ago, where they advertised specifically on the mutt mitt bag, and we wouldn't advertise on the station itself. So we're exploring all options for that.
Very much. Commissioner Whitfield, do you have another comment? Any other comments or concerns?
This is Donna.
Go ahead, Donna.
I'd like to suggest that both Parks and Rec and Open Space go back and develop some suggestions for some cohesive regulations and things, and come back to the next joint meeting with those recommendations to review and come to some kind of decisions. We can talk about this, but until we start putting together some ideas, we're just talking about it.
Good point. Thank you so much. And did I hear Commissioner Meyer in the background?
Yeah. So, Kurt Meyer here. I just had a question. You said you had 161 contacts in Mills Park. Were those contacts with those dog users solicited? In other words, did somebody call and say, hey, there's people with dogs in the park?
When we say contacts, we find those people while we're out on patrol and we initiate contact with them. That was the definition of that contact in that sense. So we were patrolling through Mills Park and we see those people with dogs.
Okay, because my question is quite simply, I'm a avid dog lover and all of that, but there's people out there that might not like walking in a park that allows dogs. They might have some kind of fear or anything like that. Has that come up, that there are parks that people regularly attend because they are specifically designated as non-dog parks? And would we be putting pressure on those people not to use those parks if we allowed all parks to have dogs in them?
I know there has been some discussion about that with dog allergies and such, and I know more specifically it's the leashed and unleashed areas that are more frequented by users specifically for that. So a dog doesn't like other dogs or people, that person will generally bring that dog to a leashed-only dog park, expecting all other dogs to be on a leash, which is why we mainly make contact in those parks regarding that kind of rule.
Yeah, I think one of the main issues, one of the main complaints that we get is an individual goes to an area where your dog has to be on a leash, and then there's dogs that are off leash at that specific area, and that dog's either coming up to their dog or that owner. And then another complaint that we get that people frequently advise us is people not picking up after their dog as well. And, going back to my point, we have the mutt mitt stations at all of those areas. So there's really no excuse for individuals or park users not to be picking up after their dogs.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is you don't get a lot of complaints from people that are trying to use parks that are designated as non-dog parks, having dogs in those parks. I just don't want to displace people through any kind of blanket-wide policy, so.
Yeah, we haven't specifically received those complaints, but that doesn't mean that that's not a concern of some of the park users that frequent Mills Park or Carriage Square Park or other parks that we have that don't allow dogs at all. We just haven't received those complaints specifically about that. Now, we do receive neighborhood complaints at some of the parks, such as Carriage Square, where residents or people that frequent the park want to make sure that dogs are staying out of that park because we do have signage that states specifically no dogs allowed at that park. So.
Okay, so there are advocates for that policy, I guess is my point, and that's something that we need to take a look at.
Yeah, really, we see that more in our smaller neighborhood parks like Carriage Square. That becomes an issue, not as much Mills Park, because there is differences as to why we don't allow dogs at those parks, because Mills Park's much bigger. We have special events. There's a playground. There's wildlife. Carriage Square, there's skateboard as well. Lots of kids running around, and then Carriage Square has the playground. So we see it more in the neighborhood parks, people that have lived in the area for quite a while and, really just want to make sure people are abiding by the rules and regulations.
All right, thank you very much.
So I will comment because Commissioner Meyer asked the question. So I will tell you, I get frequent complaints on animals in parks accosting children, and that they don't feel like they can take their 3-year-old to the park anymore because it's filled with dogs. So just because the park rangers here just said that's not the calls they're getting, we are getting those calls. So I do want to let you know, and I know of cases of dogs biting the children. I know of 3 cases over this last year, and so I'm going to check into some information on the Humane Society because I sit on a subcommittee with that, and so I'm well aware of some dog biting issues. And so I think we just are going to have to recognize the park needs to be safe for everyone.
Yeah, and just to that point, Chair, we do have incident reports with situations like that where there's conflict between park users and dogs. The information that I received from a Carson animal control officer was that they don't have any data as it pertains to their dog contacts or how many incidents there are in a situation like that, and that's what I was given by the animal control officers. But we have our own system as it pertains to request tracker, the RTs that you guys have seen, and then the incident reports in specific parks that we have.
All right, any other questions or comments?
This is Dave Whitefield.
Go ahead, Commissioner Whitefield.
This might be a question for Director Budge, possibly, or Commissioner Bagwell, but kind of like to wrap this up. So what is the process for, changing or making these regulations for dogs? And perhaps we could put something on a future agenda or have a special meeting or something about discussing that with open space.
Jennifer, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. That's a great question, and I think that's a process that we would start next. So right now, the designations for the pet-friendly parks and the parks that where dogs are prohibited were through an action by the Parks and Recreation Director. And they did have several public meetings. I don't want people to think it was happening in a vacuum, but it really happened because there were so many complaints and so many issues. So they did a lot of pilot projects, and they picked certain parks where they had no dogs, and they had some parks where they allowed off leash, and then they monitored the situation, and then that eventually got to the situation we have today. But there is so many new people moving into Carson City, and there's a lot of people that have lived here for 30 plus years, but it is still confusing because there's just not consistent rules and regulations like Supervisor Bagwell said. It's very difficult to know which park you have to go to, and especially a lot of our signs are older, they've been stolen. We are trying to update and change our signs as we have the budget available and doing our best to make that happen, but people also ignore signage. So having consistent rules would be very helpful, whether it's open space or whether it's in our parks. But I think the conversation needs to continue. So I think if at the next open space meeting and the next Parks and Recreation Commission meeting, we can have more focused discussions on those areas. And I think it was a great suggestion to, come back to this group jointly with some maybe next steps. Another thing, what we might be able to do is do a public survey when we're ready to get people's feedback. I'd like to identify future designated off-leash areas within the city because I think we need more. We do have a planned one at Lampa Ranch, but we do need safe, fenced, designated areas for people to be off-leash. I'd like to talk to the Open Space Advisory Committee about trailheads. A lot of the conflicts and a lot of the complaints that I get, and may not be in request tracker for the rangers, but are conflicts at trailheads specifically. So just that time when you're getting your dog out of the car and there's a lot of cars around or they're near a road, dogs running out, getting run over, maybe just that conflict at that initial trailhead location. So maybe we have a discussion about, is it like a quarter mile from a trailhead because we're more of an urban area? A mile I think might be long, like what the Forest Service does, but maybe a quarter mile from a trailhead, do we keep your dog on a leash and under control? And then after you're out, well into the open space area where you're separated from the congested area, would that be an option? And I think I'd like to look at other options and solutions that maybe the public or the commissioners might have. So I think the discussion would continue. We could make some implementation, through just some consensus between the committees through a director's action. But if it's something where we really feel like we need to change an ordinance down the road, we're looking at our ordinances now, and we're sort of a couple years away before it's our turn for the district attorney's office to help us kind of overhaul our codes and our ordinances. But I think now is a good time to look at what ones would we want, what are other agencies having, and what kind of wording would we want to have in there, and have some flexibility if there's an issue. Because to go back and update an ordinance again is a lot of work. So I think that would be the next steps, is continue the conversation, make some recommendations, try to gather consensus, maybe gather some public feedback, see if a director's implementation would be sufficient, or if we need to change a code or ordinance. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Dave.
All right, so gentlemen, you're going to give us ideas in terms of what you need from both bodies. You do have our support, I can tell you that right now. Whatever you need from us, just let us know, and we're going to be here for you. And if there are no more questions or comments from either body, I'm going to...
This is Jeremy Hall. I have a quick comment that I'd like
Okay,
to
go ahead,
make.
sir.
It's actually a suggestion for potentially our park rangers. Well, first, I would like to agree with Commissioner Bagwell's suggestion of just making it consistent for dogs, for parks where dogs are allowed. I think it's a completely consistent message to just say dogs must be on leash. If there is designated fencing areas where dogs can be off leash for those parks, then so be it. The dogs can be off leash. But I totally agree with that suggestion. And then my comment to the park rangers, I was curious where the map of Carson City friendly parks came from your presentation. If that is something that's available on Carson City's website or some other media, I would suggest making that map more available to the public. And I have found that that John's and Tyler's Facebook, YouTube videos that they do, where they talk about issues that they've had at Kings Canyon parking area. I thought that was an effective way to convey that message. And in order to convey a message like this effectively, maybe something like that could be put together. Hey, here's our map of Carson City pet friendly parks. And if the map was put together, correctly using a web application, then people could just use it using their phones. They could click on the map, and then an information would be presented in a pop-up that says, "Here are the rules." That could be one suggestion to help just convey all those rules for our different parks.
Yeah, I actually made the map just with Google Map software just for the brochure, and it's actually been getting a lot more use. So I agree with your comment. We should definitely put it online and put it on Facebook as well.
Cool. Thank you, Tyler.
That was Tyler. This is John. But just to add to that real quick, any dog contact that we make, we are distributing that brochure, unless, of course, they don't want the brochure. We're educating that individual, whether it be Mills Park, Carriage Square, Fuji, wherever. We're distributing that brochure that Tyler created. So.
Excellent. All right, if there are no more comments or questions, I'm going to thank you, gentlemen. That was an excellent presentation. It was very informative. And again, if you need anything from either body, please let us know. And we're going to schedule continuing discussions in the future.
We appreciate the time. I know we take up a little more of your guys' time every time we come and present, but we do appreciate you hearing us out.
For.
And we appreciate the support, so thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
All right. We're going to move on to item number 6, I'm sorry. For discussion only, a presentation and discussion regarding e-bicycle and e-scooter working group recommendations. Greg, do you want to come on down here and share with us what you know?
Thank you, Chair Keever. I'd also like to introduce Lucia Maloney, who is our Transportation Manager with Public Works, and I'm, for the record, Greg Berggren, Trails Coordinator with Parks and Recreation and Open Space. And I'm going to bring up our presentation. Okay. Okay, Lucia, are you on?
I'm here. Yep.
Okay.
Want me to take it away?
Well, yeah, Lucia is going to start off the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much for having me this evening. I'm Lucia Maloney. I'm the Transportation Manager in the Public Works Department here in Carson City. Staff convened an e-bicycle and e-scooter working group back in October. And the working group consisted of staff, management from various city departments, members of the Board of Supervisors, the Regional Transportation Commission, this board here this evening, and the public. Tonight, Greg and I are going to provide you with a presentation very similar to what was provided to the working group in October. And then we'll conclude with the recommendations that came out of the working group. And we'd be happy to answer questions or receive additional guidance from you all. I talk very quickly, and Greg's going to get to the meat of the matter. But please feel free to interrupt as we go and ask questions. And there's a lot to unpack here. So although Greg and I could really discuss this over probably 3 or 4 hours, we're going to try to boil down the key information. The question we asked the working group was, so these devices are here, and how are we as Carson City going to respond and get ahead of the technology so that we can provide a safe, understandable, and enforceable framework for our community? Next slide, Greg. Thank you. So we established a meeting roadmap. I'm a transportation person, so it's a roadmap. In a few moments, Greg will give you some of the juiciest information that you never knew that you wanted to know about e-bicycles and e-scooters, starting with what are they, where can they legally go now, what are others, what are our neighbors in the state doing. Then we'll briefly talk about e-bike and e-scooter share programs at the end, before wrapping up with staff and working group recommendations that came out of our discussion in October. So with that kickoff, Greg's going to provide you with really the details of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucia. Okay, so electric bicycles, what are they? From the federal standpoint, the Consumer Product Safety Act defines e-bikes as a low-speed electric bike with 2 or 3 wheels, fully operational pedals, and a maximum speed of 20 miles an hour. California further breaks down e-bikes into 3 different classes, and the manufacturers also use these same classes, and they're becoming very common terms among e-bikes. So Class 1 e-bike is a pedal assist, which means that the only way that the user can get the assist of the electric motor is by pedaling. And these bikes, Class 1, are also speed limited to 20 miles an hour. I should say the assist is limited to 20 miles an hour. So once the bicycle hits 20 miles an hour, the user no longer gets assist from the electric motor. A Class 2 e-bike is throttle assisted, so the user can either get the assist by pedaling, or they can use a throttle that's usually located on the handlebars. And just for full disclosure, our department has 2 e-bikes. They're Class 2, and they're primarily used by our park rangers. They've been actually quite beneficial to our department, especially for making contacts. So then there's one more class of e-bikes, that's the Class 3, and that is a pedal assist only, and it is speed limited to 28 miles an hour. And one thing I might mention is that there's a lot of information on the internet on how to disable those speed limiters. So there is a lot of people that actually are out there riding these bikes at higher speeds than those which they're originally limited to. Okay, in Nevada, e-bikes are defined by the NRS essentially as the same as the Class 1 and Class 2 that we just went over. And the NRS specifically disallows or prohibits mopeds from the definition. Electric scooters. The Federal Highway Administration has been essentially silent on the scooters, and so that's resulted in a lot of inconsistent application and enforcement of regulations throughout the jurisdictions. In Nevada, electric scooters are defined as a vehicle with handlebars and electric motor that is designed to be ridden on or in an upright seated position and propelled by its electric motor or propulsion provided by the rider. Such a vehicle must not weigh more than 100 pounds without a rider and must have a maximum speed of not more than 20 miles per hour when solely powered by its electric motor. Electric bicycles, where can they go? This is where things start to get really complicated. So on bicycle transportation and pedestrian walkways that are federally funded, e-bikes are not permitted, except with certain exceptions, one of them being if a state or local jurisdiction specifically prohibits them, or permits them rather. In Nevada, e-bikes and e-scooters, the NRS allows Class 1 and Class 2 anywhere where traditional bikes are allowed unless they're specifically prohibited locally. And except as otherwise provided in an ordinance enacted pursuant to the NRS, an electric scooter may be operated on a roadway, bicycle lane, path, or route at a speed of not more than 15 miles an hour, and on a sidewalk or other pedestrian areas at a speed that does not exceed the limit set in an ordinance enacted pursuant to the NRS, if any. Okay, what are other people doing? So the Department of Agriculture, which is essentially the U.S. Forest Service, that's our, they manage a lot of our lands locally. They only permit e-bikes on trails that are, or roads where, that are already motorized. So if you have, say for example, a single track trail that's for non-motorized use, the e-bikes would not be allowed. That's in contrast with the Department of Interior, which locally would be the BLM and the National Park Service, where they do allow Class 1, only Class 1, anywhere where traditional e-bikes are permitted. California State Parks allows Class 1 and Class 2 wherever traditional bikes are permitted, but only on paved surfaces. The state of California allows Class 1 and Class 2 e-bikes on all bike route classes, but they don't allow Class 3. Nevada State Parks has no specific policy. However, Lake Tahoe Nevada State Park does allow Class 1 e-bikes on their trails, including in the backcountry. So the Lake Tahoe Nevada State Park backcountry makes up part of the western side of geographic Carson City. And that gets a little bit complicated because the Forest Service also has adjacent lands with trails that may enter the Lake Tahoe Nevada State Park. So you theoretically could not have an e-bike on those U.S. Forest Service trails, but you could once you entered the state park. Douglas County does not have specific regulations, but they do prohibit motorized vehicles on paths and trails set aside for bicycling, walking, and horseback riding. Tahoe City defers to California regulations, but they post a share the path signage. Washoe County does not allow e-bikes on any of their trails except in certain circumstances. And they also have a speed limit for all bicycles, whether they're motorized or unmotorized, of 15 miles an hour. E-scooters, what are others doing? So in California, their law says that you must be 16 years of age or older, have a valid driver's license, wear a bicycle helmet, have no passengers, and follow the rules of the road the same as cars do. The motorized scooter must have brakes, may not have handlebars raised above the operator's shoulders, and if ridden at night, must have a headlight, taillight, and reflectors. And a motorized scooter may not be operated on sidewalks or on streets if the posted speed limit is in excess of 25 miles an hour, unless in a Class 2 bicycle lane. The problem with that with some of those rules, like being 16 years old, is that the scooters are attracted, or young people are very much attracted to the scooters. And so, for example, in South Lake Tahoe, they're in the process of developing ordinances for e-scooters because they've had a series of very serious injuries involving children. And there's a number of jurisdictions that are also struggling with the same thing because of serious injuries, both for children and adults. Reno, they're working on ordinances, and but right now it's really a patchwork wherever you go throughout the state and the country. Okay, in Carson City, we have no specific CMCs that regulate e-bikes or e-scooters, and so we defer to the NRS. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Lucia.
Thanks, Greg. So with the 2019 legislative session, Assembly Bill 485 amended the NRS 484A, and a portion of that regulation is shown on the slide. And this is the section of local regulation of e-scooters and scooter share programs. And essentially what this does is it gives locals the ability to enact an ordinance to regulate the time, the place, the manner of operation of electric scooters. We're allowed to prohibit the use of electric scooters in specific areas or area of the jurisdiction. We can establish speed limits, and we may establish an ordinance to regulate the operation of scooter share program entirely. There's also a provision, which I included here, Section 4, that we cannot regulate scooter share programs to be more restrictive than those applicable to riders of bicycles or electric bicycles. So that I wanted to point that out as well. If you go to the next slide, Greg. There are many pros and cons with share programs. The first and last mile micromobility is something that's just, it's really fantastic from a transportation network's perspective. It's possible to reduce traffic in congested urban areas, and there are sustainability benefits of share programs. On the con side, we have received comments related to visual pollution, right-of-way clutter. There's abandonment concerns in other jurisdictions where scooters or bikes are essentially dumped in places that are undesirable. There's an injury potential and safety concerns, particularly in the area of new riders to the devices, riders that aren't necessarily paying attention to their surroundings, and then how you handle and address the issue of helmets. And then there's also the question of infrastructure availability. Although the city has done a really good job at improving our bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, there are still gaps in our system. And so how we manage sidewalk versus off sidewalk use, what do we do when there are no bike lanes, and those types of things are certainly something for discussion. That said, there's still a lot in the air, and there's not a successful Nevada program that we could model off of right now. And staff have concerns about moving too quickly. Slide, Greg. So the recommendations that staff brought to the working group back in October are shown on the screen. The first was that we haven't received a substantial amount of concerns or complaints related to the use of e-bikes in Carson City generally. So here I'm speaking about privately owned e-bikes. They're becoming more pervasive. They're beneficial in that the users tend to be newer users to bicycling, less experienced. Speaking for myself, getting an e-bike allowed me to really learn about bicycling and give me more confidence in using the trails. And so I think you see a lot of users like that. And so we made the recommendation to the working group, and they were generally in agreement on that. The second point was staff recommendation on an education campaign for Carson City Pathways. And so Carson City is a member of the Lake Tahoe Pathway Partnership. There's a lot of really great existing educational material. The working group recommended and agreed with staff that we move forward with an educational campaign on e-bike usage on our trails. The Parks Department has already started that in collaboration with Public Works and others, and so I think we're on a really good track with that. The third recommendation was speed limits on pathways, and I believe you received a public comment related to the concern about e-bikes on the single track trails, and that's a little outside my jurisdiction, but I will say in talking with Greg, setting speed limits on pathways and in the discussion we had with the working group would be very challenging to enforce. And it sort of relates to the staff recommendation on education, which was, it's not so much about how fast the devices can go, but how do we encourage safe use and sharing the trail and working together to have a successful network for recreation. And then the final recommendation, we discussed an ordinance in a lot of detail. Just for your information, if a company came in today or tomorrow and dropped, say, 5,000 e-scooters downtown on our sidewalks, there's very little that the city could do to do anything about that. After a lot of discussion, the working group recommended that staff initiate development of an ordinance, which would prohibit any bicycle or scooter share program within the city unless or until a subsequent ordinance is enacted. And so what that would do is we could very quickly do an ordinance that would establish a framework that would set us up to give us time if a company came in that wanted to do scooter share program, potentially help us develop that subsequent ordinance so that we could get it right. And there's a lot up in the air, as I mentioned, and since we don't have that Nevada case study that's successful, this would buy us that time. Greg, I'll go to the last slide. And so the next steps from the working group were to come to this joint meeting this evening and present those recommendations to you. And I ask you, do you have any questions or concerns with the ordinance high level as I just discussed? Do you agree with the recommendation to implement an educational campaign and further monitor effectiveness over time? We could certainly revisit speed limits in the future if that's something that's desired. And then are we missing anything, or is there anything else that you've seen that we haven't considered? And then after tonight, we'll be going to the Regional Transportation Commission after it gets its new member or new members in the next couple of months of the calendar year. And so thank you again for your time, and I appreciate any feedback you can provide.
Lucia, Greg, thank you so much for that presentation. It was quite informative. We appreciate you taking the time to be here. Do any of the committee members or commission members have any questions or comments? Vice Chair Well?
I'll make one comment and possible suggestion. A while back, I borrowed a bike and rode around in Edmonton in Canada, and the people said, well, great, we've got to get bells on our bikes because it's a law there, a regulation that you must have a bell. And I found that I really liked that. I wish we had it, and the reason I liked it was if I come up on somebody, I don't know whether I should ring my bell or not, because some people get startled and they don't like it. But once people get used to it, everybody understands, okay, I'm not trying to be an irritating person. I'm just trying to let you know that I'm coming. And so if it's something that we're commonly doing and it's viewed as something that's courteous, I think it'd be a positive step. And that could be something that would be an education, or it could be a regulation, either way. But I really appreciated that, the way that their culture was, because people were everybody was being polite in terms of, okay, you're just letting me know what's going on. You're not trying to be an irritating person. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Greg, and I'd like to follow up on Member Welsh's suggestions. So that is kind of part of our planned education campaign. We've started to place some signs that have a share the trail message, and one of the things that it includes is it says go slow and say hello. And we need to spread the message that when you are approaching someone from behind, that making your presence known is important. It's not to scare the person, and it's not to be impolite. It's the polite thing to do, and that's also important when coming upon an equestrian. The horse The horse needs to know that you're a human being. And so that sound, whether it be a bell or just a polite hello, I'm behind you, on your left or something, it's got to be a critical portion of that education campaign.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Yes, I have.
Who would like to go
Hello?
first?
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
This is Margie Evans, and I just want to say that I would like to see, your education program, Greg, is a great idea, but I would like to see that education program expanded to the schools, because I see bicycling as a fun activity, but I see kids riding on streets with their parents who are not following the rules of the road. I was taught when I was learning to ride a bicycle that you ride just the same way as if you were operating a motor vehicle, and you use signals and the whole bit. And granted, I see people who are very responsible, but I see a lot of people who are riding wherever they feel like, however they feel like as well. So I'd like to see some more education reaching farther into our community. A really big effort to make sure everybody knows that they have to follow the rules of the road. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Member Evans, and I agreed. I know that when I was younger, we did have that kind of education, and I don't know if it's present now or not. I did have an email conversation today with the coach of the Carson High School mountain bike team, and that was part of the conversation and part of what, we have that contact within the schools and with him teaching the right courtesy and etiquette to his group, we just need to be able to expand that, I think, to everybody who's out there. So that is an important suggestion.
Thank you. Any other comments?
This is Wilkie, Stacy Wilkie, just to follow up
Stacy,
on
we're
that.
having trouble hearing you.
Yeah, you would think all these Zoom meetings I would be more technology savvy. Can you hear me now? No? Okay, I'll try a different method.
Do you want to call in, Stacy?
Yeah, I'll try a different thing.
Okay.
Okay. So while she's going to call back in, let me understand your recommendations here, Lucia and Greg, if I can. So your first recommendation, that's no additional local regulation on e-bicycles. Does that lend me to believe that wherever a bicycle goes, an e-bicycle goes, if we're not going to regulate it? So your actual recommendation is e-bike equals bike.
What we would be doing is deferring to the NRS in this case, yes. So, so Class 1 and Class 2 would be allowed where regular bikes are allowed.
Right, bike equals e-bike. Because I think it's important that we're all understanding what this is actually saying. And then the education campaign, before I could say, yes, I believe in education, I don't want to say anything different than that, but I need to see the document that you're suggesting is the education, because does it fit with all these other recommendations? So it's a share the road type of,
So
I don't know what's in the education.
Sure. So that it would be, I mean, we don't have a concise program right now, but we've started implementing signage on our trails within parks and open space that have that share the trail message. For example, we have on the V&T trail to the west of the college, we have signs that say share the trail, respect others, use safe speeds, go slow and say hello, clean up after your pet, and enjoy. We have similar messages on signs on the new trails that we just opened up in the Carson River area, like Buzzy's Ranch Trail. And so signage is definitely a component of it. Our department is also going to start working on a video that will host representatives from various user groups that will be able to discuss their concerns and their issues and their desires with regard to etiquette on the trails. So we want to have representatives from the equestrian community, from hikers and runners, and from bicyclers and mountain bikers. So we're thinking that the video would be a component of it, and then perhaps online social media messaging and brochures that we could make available to the public. So we, as Lucia mentioned, we are part of the Lake Tahoe Pathway Partnership, and they have kind of a smorgasbord of messages that we can pick from, and we can use those in any of our signage or any of our educational materials. So does that help answer the question?
It tells me where you're going. I guess for me, then, is I look for the overall messaging. So 2 only works if 1 is in place. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. The discussion, it's not an action item, but that we're going to say class 1 and class 2 e-bikes equals a bike. So that's your first recommendation, then that makes number 2 work, because you can then share the path, blah, 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 blah. Number 3, you discuss a speed limit on the pathways. I don't see how you're going to enforce that at all. I mean, I don't see radar guns, or I just don't see that. So I would say that I just concur with you on number 3. Let's not discuss it. It doesn't make any sense. There's no one that's going to come and implement and say, I think you went 21 miles per hour, and I'm going to give you a ticket, and who's going to give them a ticket? So maybe number 3 is no. And then number 4, if I'm understanding you correctly, it's only on the share program. So a commercial vendor wanting to come into town to rent e-bikes or scooters, we would put, what you're actually suggesting is a moratorium. So we as the Board of Supervisors would adopt the ordinance that just says that business model is not approved in Carson City until we create another ordinance. So we call it a moratorium. Is that what you're suggesting?
Correct. So our concern is that the share program could just suddenly show up, and then we've got a problem to deal with. And it's not that we're recommending against a potential share program somewhere in the future. We just want to make sure that we have the ability to make sure that it's done the way we want it to be done, and not the way that a potential vendor may do it for us. And so if we have that ordinance in place, then we have the time to have those conversations with potential vendors and develop a program if we so chose to do that.
Absolutely. Well, and I'll just go on the record telling you I like moratoriums. We've exercised those in the last few years at the board level for items that we know we need, 6 months or so breathing room to be able to do the job well instead of hurry, because it's better to do it well than to rush. So I like the moratorium idea. And Lucia, I saw on the slide that it said it was going to go to RTC in December. Are you telling me it's not going to go in December now? And is that going to be an action item to the RTC?
Thank you, Supervisor. So Supervisor Bonkowski was a member of the working group as chair of the RTC, and his request, so that slide, those were the slides that we presented in October. We had initially suggested bringing this to RTC in December, and he requested that we push it to the new calendar year with whoever the new supervisor is that ends up on RTC.
As an action item or a non-action item?
It would potentially be an action item, though at this point, I'm thinking that we will bring an item that builds out the concept of an ordinance, but gets direction from RTC to move forward on that ordinance. It's not going to be necessarily approval of a specific ordinance. that will go through the Board of Supervisors. So it would be similar to this item, but with direction to pursue an ordinance.
Thank you.
And Supervisor, if I may also add, in response to your question on the speed limits, I did speak with the Sheriff's Office on this. So under the NRS provision about the speed limits of bikes and e-bikes in Nevada, although we don't have the resources to be out there on the trails with our radar guns, as you said, policing e-bikes, that NRS provision would still be applicable because we're in Nevada. And so if for some reason a bicyclist or an e-bicyclist wasn't paying attention and ran into someone with a stroller and there was an injury or something, that provision would still be applicable in civil court and that would still come into play. The staff recommendation had to do with whether the city wanted to enact a municipal code ordinance on top of that NRS provision, and we didn't think it was necessary.
I believe, go ahead, I was going to say, I believe Committee Member Massad has been patiently waiting to say something, and I would like to give him the opportunity.
Thank you very much. I just want to say that I'm totally supportive of the banning of scooters. I've been in several cities where they allow share riding scooters, and I got to tell you, people leave them just laying all over the sidewalks. They're a hazard for people walking down the streets. And, you know, we just spent all this money on downtown to make it a walkable place. If you start cluttering it up with scooters, I'm telling you, you're not going to be happy with it. And as far as the speed limit on trails, I think it's a great idea. Not because it's going to be enforced, but because it's a suggestion that tells you to slow down. So if it was my input, I would say, please put up some signs that say, let's slow down and say hello to your neighbors, and no to share scooters. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or observations?
Yes, please. I have a comment. This is Jeremy Hall.
All right, after you, Jeremy, we're going to go back and see if Stacy can come on board.
Okay, thank you. So I had a question for Greg. If we're adopting the Nevada policy for Class 1 and Class 2 equals a bike that can go anywhere, my confusion is about Class 2 because the way I understand it, Class 2 e-bikes have a throttle. And my take on the situation is that, you know, if you have a throttle, you have a motorized vehicle, which I would be, you know, I'm more in line with Mr. Harrison, who wrote in some comments on his perception of e-bikes. I'm more in line with his thinking when it comes to Class 2 bikes, because from my understanding, these things they're actually motorized because they're not pedal assist and they're throttle based. Can you confirm that?
That's correct. Class 2 can be throttle based, and that's definitely a consideration for our single track trails. It's potentially could be an issue with regard to increased damage to trails and problems with user conflict and things like that. I think that bicycles in general, I mean, even a non-motorized bicycle ridden by a very skilled rider can go very fast, and in a lot of cases, on our single track trails we do need that education component to be able to stress the respecting each other. But you're right, we need further discussion with regard to single track, and I think that the presentation tonight is really more geared towards our in-town trails, but there's a lot of controversy with regard to single track, and the direction we go with that still remains to be seen.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Yeah, I guess my framework is open space, right? So I'm speaking from the single track perspective. So I guess to just go on record, I'd be happy to share trails with Class 1 e-bikes because they're pedal assist. I hope someday to own one of these things. Someday when I'm not able to pedal what my friends call an analog bike. I don't think that the class 2, and I don't really know what to say about the class 3 ones. They seem like they're the exact same as a class 1, other than the governor is, regulated at 20 versus 28. So I see those as the same thing. And then, just speaking of, you mentioned a little bit, Greg, about, you spoke about etiquette, trail etiquette. And really, I wanted to address Mr. Harrison's letter that he wrote for this meeting. And really, he, beside the fact that he's not a proponent of e-bikes, the heart, from my interpretation of his letter, was about trail etiquette. And I think that we could make some strides for messaging, signage, that really speak to trail etiquette, especially on our single track trails. I think that one thing, once the world went sideways with COVID and everybody started going outdoors, I've seen a huge impact to the trails out my back door up Ash Canyon, because there are so many folks on these trails now, and very few of them know the rules of the trail, that you yield to uphill traffic, and that when you yield, you stop, you move aside, and you let the uphill traffic go past. You don't just blaze past going downhill full speed just to get out of the way, which creates just a plethora of social trails. So I think some messaging is in order to make sure that folks understand, the rules that will help people be safe and that will help maintain our trails. And I have many thoughts on this matter, and would happy to continue the conversation once this topic comes to the Open Space Commission. But that's what I had to say about the matter on this.
Yeah, thank you for that input, Member Hall. And I think that I'm totally in agreement that we need that educational component desperately. Right now, we're working with Muscle Powered on trail signage for the west side of town, for wayfinding signage, and we are including the yellow triangle with the right of way, and then we also are planning to put messaging on the trailhead kiosk signs. Because you're exactly right, people, there are so many new people out there, and it's not just bicycle riders, but just a lot of new people outdoors in our open spaces that are not that familiar with etiquette in the outdoors, and we need to ensure that they have that message, because going forward, we're probably gaining a lot more people that are going to be consistently using our open spaces.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you so much. Stacy, have you resolved your technical difficulties?
Can you hear me now? Hello?
No, not really. You can't.
Okay. I don't know what the problem is. I haven't quite figured it out again.
I can hear you, Stacy.
I can hear you, Stacy.
Hear you too.
Jerry can hear you, Stacy.
I can hear you.
Okay. So for those that can hear me, just to go with Donna's comments, I think is that in the schools, we have a bicycle week where the PE teachers actually do the bike education for a whole week. And then the Educational Foundation 2 years ago, when it was allowed, did a bike fair. So we are doing bike education in the schools as we speak, and working with NDOT. And I think Safer Routes to Schools too, we've worked with. So that hasn't been abandoned by the schools, and I just wanted people to know that there is that educational component that's happening in our schools.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the comment. Are there any other comments or questions by the committee or commission members?
I'd like to comment on the various classes. To me, the consideration of what class a bike is not particularly relevant in my mind. My issue is that if I have a bike that can go 28 miles an hour, but I can only go 10 miles an hour, you should be regulating the behavior, not the machine. It would be like saying, you can't buy a vehicle that goes more than 80 miles an hour. Well, you can buy a car that will go 100, 200 miles an hour, that doesn't mean it's okay. So it's the behavior to me, and how you're riding and whether you're damaging the trail and whether you're causing potential harm to your fellow citizens. I don't really care what your bike is capable of. I want to know what you're doing on your bike. Thank you.
Appreciate the comment. Any other comments or questions?
Dave Whitefield. This is Dave.
Go ahead.
Hello? Oh, okay, thank you. Greg and Lucia, thanks for the presentation. Good information. I want to throw a little wrinkle in, a couple of maybe different classes of equipment. I own a couple of Segways, they're the small ones. They're about 30 pounds each, and they are limited to 11 miles an hour. I think, and this is a question for you, I think that they would be considered scooters. And if so, the follow-on question is, are scooters considered the same as e-bikes as far as where they can go? And I should probably say I've been in a couple of cities where, they offer Segway tours. Washington, D.C. is an example. Winston-Salem, North Carolina, I've been on a Segway tour there. And I just wonder where, it's something you might consider in addition to the vehicles that you've already mentioned. So that's my comment.
Would you like to address that, Greg?
Yeah, good comment. And I can't specifically answer that question because I don't know if segways are, I haven't seen where they've been addressed in, specifically by a jurisdiction or an ordinance. Not to say that they aren't, but I just haven't done that research. Maybe Lucia knows something that I don't.
This is Lucia. Yeah, NRS covers segways in a different classification, is my understanding, than e-bikes or e-scooters. They were addressed in the previous legislation. As staff, we discussed, how do you handle this, and how do you create a framework for technology that may not even exist yet, right? So we've started seeing now the electric skateboards, those one-wheel things with the board that can zip around, and the NRS on e-scooters doesn't cover that. But again, what do we need an ordinance or a regulatory framework for those, or maybe something we don't know that's going to come, a hoverboard, or can we manage it with education and targeted outreach? I don't know, but it's a great discussion point.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
If I may, Madam Chair, may I make one more plug? We oversee the 5-county Western Nevada Safe Routes to School program under my shop over at Public Works. We quite frankly have more money than we can spend right now. If any of you are familiar with families of kids that need bicycles to get to school, we've received some requests of folks that are trying to get bikes for kids these days to go to school if they're not comfortable on the school bus or for whatever reason. Are you, Stacy, if you know of anyone, or we can provide educational materials for biking. We can provide helmet fitting. We can go out in the schools. We have a lot of resources. It's just been really challenging with COVID to spend that money. So please do reach out if there's an opportunity that we can support any of that bike education or anything in our community related to that.
So clarify for me, are you saying that you have funds that if somebody in Carson City, a child needed a bicycle to get to school, you'd be able to assist that child?
Yeah, any child K through 8 in Carson City, and we would of course fit them with a helmet as well. Of course, our funds are limited, but if someone needs something right now, we have funds available that we could support them.
Oh, great! That's a great program. Thank you for sharing. All right. If there are no more comments or questions, I'm going to close the discussion on this item and say thank you to both Lucia and Greg for their time. It was an excellent presentation.
Okay, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
We're going to move on to item number 7, and I'm going to turn this over to Vice Chair Welch and Lindsay, and you can take it away. How's that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Lindsay Boyer, Open Space Manager. So the item we have before you is discussion and possible action regarding the Open Space Advisory Committee schedule for calendar year 2021. As per the Open Space Advisory Committee bylaws and as directed by the Board of Supervisors, the Open Space Advisory Committee will meet 4 times a year with 2 joint meetings with the Parks and Recreation Commission. So you have the proposed schedule and calendar before you, and with that, I'll take any questions.
Lindsay, this is Jeremy. I'm good with the schedule.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeremy.
So I believe we need a motion.
I believe so.
Would any of the members care to make a
This
motion?
is Margie. Okay.
Go ahead, Margie.
I was just going to second the motion that we adopt the 2021 Open Space Advisory Council as it is written.
Jeremy, are you going to make that motion?
Sure, please make it a motion that the schedule as proposed is fine.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, now it's our turn. This is action number 8 for possible action. Same thing, discussion and possible action regarding the Parks and Recreation Commission meeting schedule for calendar year 2021. Jennifer Budge, would you take it away, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. You have a copy of the proposed schedule for 2021 in your packet, and I'll entertain any questions or a motion.
Has everybody had a chance to review the schedule?
Yes, I move that we approve that schedule for 2021.
Okay. Is there a
Second?
All right, any discussion? All those in? Aye? Any?
Aye.
Any?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was quick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. Just a couple updates on some vacant positions that we have available. Lindsay's been actively working with the Human Resources Department to update the Natural Resource Specialist position. We hope to get that posted soon and advertised. We'll make sure everybody's aware of that when that hits the streets. We have 2 park maintenance worker full-time positions that have been vacant. We did interviews last week on that. Hopefully have some selection and fill those positions soon. As you know, we still have no support from Department of Corrections for inmates right now due to COVID, so we're down 20 full-time equivalents, so we desperately need those positions filled. We also have, we are recruiting right now, or just ended, I think, on Friday for the senior park ranger position, which is jointly funded between Parks and Open Space, and a new position that was approved by the Board of Supervisors. So we're excited to move forward with that. I don't have any statistics for you right now on how many applicants we have, because I think we got a bunch on Friday. But we'll continue to update you on that position. And we did hire a new range coordinator. We're so excited. He's coming from Arizona. He used to live in the area here, so he's happy to come back. His name is Paul Joseph, and he'll be starting in the coming weeks. So we're excited to have him on board. And then we do have a vacant recreation coordinator position. We'll be going to the Internal Finance Committee in the coming weeks to get approval to fill that position as well. And then is there any questions on Board of Supervisor action items or anything that was in your packet?
Is that it, Jennifer?
That's it. Thank you.
All right, are there any comments or questions from the commission members? Hearing none, we're going to move on to members' announcements. Do any of the members of either board have any announcements to make?
This is Donna Inverson. I submitted a packet. I don't know if Greg's still there, if he can put it up, but everyone should have gotten it with the Historic Virginia and Truckee Trails new logo and our official maps. So we now have an official logo and official maps.
Thank you so much for sharing.
And we will be going, Juan Guzman and I will be presenting the map of Carson City to the RTC in January and requesting that it be accepted as the designated route through Carson City. And then hopefully once that's accepted, then we're gonna try to go February to RAC to see if they have any money to provide us with the signs to put up throughout the city. But with the new maps, we actually are able to sign the trail from Carson River on the south, at the south end of Bigelow, to downtown Reno. So we'll have the official route completed that much. And from Washington and Carson Street in Carson City east to Deer Run Road. We have to build and then portions of Douglas County will be signed in Douglas County. It'll be kind of hit and miss in Douglas County until we can get some easements. And then of course we have to build the bridge over the Carson River and build an entire new trail from Deer Run Road to Virginia City. But other than that, we've got a trail.
Excellent.
So if anybody has any questions or comments.
Does anybody have any questions or comments for Donna?
Kudos to Great Basin Institute and Muscle Power for the maps. They look great.
Yeah, one young man, an intern, I gave him the maps that, oh, my mind just went blank, that we made from our very first meeting and some direction. And in a few days, he came back with these maps. Just a young kid. He just took it and went running with it. So, yeah, he did a really great job. So it's really exciting what's happening. It's like taking off finally after like 12 years of work. So it's very exciting.
Okay. Any other announcements? I have a question. Commissioner Bagwell, is this your last meeting with us?
Probably.
Okay, well, I want to say congratulations. Carson City's going to be in good hands. And I want to thank you for all your hard work and your expertise and your input. You made many of our deliberations easier, and we're going to miss you on this board.
Well, thank you. It's certainly been a board that I have enjoyed and loved and learned, and I'll miss all of you. It's the first one I was assigned to when I became a supervisor, so I'll really miss it. Thank you very much. It's been just an honor to work with all of you. Carson City's in good hands with the members of both the Open Space and the Park and Rec Commission. We're pretty lucky city to have such dedicated volunteers.
All right.
And good staff. I'll go ahead and say that too.
Thank you. I'm sure we know, we don't tell you that enough, do we? You guys are fabulous. We really appreciate everything you all do. Let's move on to future agenda items. Is there any future agenda items members of either board would like to see? Speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, hearing, Jennifer.
I'll just jump in a little bit. Jennifer Budge, Parks and Recreation Director. We did hear, obviously, the dog use item earlier today, so Lindsay and I will make sure we have that on future agendas to talk with each board, and hopefully back in another joint meeting. And then another one that I just didn't see on our list, but I didn't want anyone to think we forgot about it, was the Kings Canyon Trailhead. And as we have updates for that, we'll make sure we bring that to the boards as well.
This might come under the heading of education, but regarding dogs on trails, the comment that I've heard most often is, why should I clean up after my dog? We're out in the wide open. Maybe we could do some education about, well, it carries disease, it's nasty, and because I said so.
That's actually a really good comment. One of our AmeriCorps that we had previously actually created an animated video about why it's important to pick up after your pet, and it's up to you to pick it up type of comment, but about the environmental impacts of leaving what's left behind and having that responsibility. So we can maybe replay that. We actually have some great messaging that she put together about the environmental impacts related to that and why it's important.
Thank you so much, appreciate that. If there's no more future agenda items, I'm going to take us on to public comment. Is there any members of the public present who'd like to comment?
There is no final public comment, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Then in that case, I'm going to move on to motion to adjourn. Do I have a motion? Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any comment? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. We are adjourned.